No uniform, no weapon in sight, just a calm presence in the crowd. But when the attacker raised his gun, she moved faster than anyone could see, and the truth of who she was came crashing into the open. Captain Jessica "Ghost" Rivera stood in line at the Fort Bragg commissary checkout wearing faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and worn sneakers that looked like they'd seen better days. At 5 feet 6 inches with shoulder-length auburn hair falling loosely around her face and gentle brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, she blended into the crowd of military families shopping for groceries with the effortless invisibility of someone who had perfected the art of not being noticed. Her hands moved across items in her shopping cart with casual efficiency. She navigated the crowded aisles with the patient demeanor of any off-duty service member, and she maintained the kind of relaxed civilian appearance that made even experienced military personnel assume she was just another military spouse running weekend errands. But Master Sergeant Collins, standing 2 lanes over, had noticed something unusual about her posture. The way she positioned herself with clear sight lines to all exits. Her eyes made constant tactical sweeps of the store interior, brief glances that most people would miss, but movements that came from serious training. The commissary staff and shopping families treated her exactly like what she appeared to be, a civilian dependent running routine errands. Casual, excuse me, interactions when she needed to reach past someone, polite nods from other shoppers who assumed she was a military wife, or simply ignored entirely when service members were discussing base operations and training schedules. None of these soldiers, airmen, and Marines had any reason to investigate the background of someone who clearly wasn't military personnel and posed no operational significance to their daily lives. Captain Rivera's shopping routine reinforced every assumption about her civilian status. She arrived during peak family shopping hours, methodically worked through a grocery list that suggested meal planning for a household, positioned herself in checkout lines with the patient resignation of someone accustomed to commissary crowds, and maintained the kind of relaxed weekend demeanor that characterized off-duty family life on military installations. Her behavior was completely normal, her presence was utterly unremarkable, and her civilian appearance was so convincing that even military police walking security patrols gave her no more attention than any other dependent. Sergeant Martinez, working commissary security that afternoon, had caught something odd during his routine surveillance. The woman in civilian clothes moved through crowded areas with spatial awareness that seemed almost tactical, never allowing herself to be boxed in, always maintaining escape routes, positioning herself where she could observe multiple approaches simultaneously. The movements were so subtle that most people would never notice, but they suggested training that went far beyond normal civilian experience. Staff Sergeant Johnson, restocking shelves near the produce section, had also observed something peculiar about the auburn-haired woman's shopping patterns. She wasn't just browsing products randomly like most weekend shoppers. Her route through the store followed a systematic pattern that provided maximum situational awareness while appearing completely casual. Her cart movement, her pause points, even her position while examining products. Everything suggested someone who was conducting unconscious threat assessment while maintaining perfect civilian cover. Welcome to Silent Salute, where we discover that the most dangerous protectors often hide in plain sight. Before we reveal this incredible story of split-second heroism, tell us in the comments which country you're watching from today. And if you believe that true guardians walk among us unnoticed until the moment they're needed most, hit that subscribe button to support our mission. We're honored to share these extraordinary stories of hidden warriors with you. The Fort Bragg commissary was experiencing typical Saturday afternoon chaos. Military families stocking up for the week, children running between aisles while parents chased after them, and the general controlled mayhem that characterized weekend shopping on any major military installation. The store was packed with soldiers, airmen, Marines, and their families, creating the kind of crowded environment where individual awareness became secondary to navigating through masses of people and shopping carts. Captain Rivera had completed her shopping and was waiting in the express checkout line when she noticed something that made her tactical instincts activate like a silent alarm. A man in dark clothing was moving through the store with purposeful determination that didn't match normal shopping behavior. His eyes weren't scanning products or prices, but people and positions. Her observation was professional and automatic, the kind of threat assessment that came from training most people never received. But nothing in her relaxed civilian appearance suggested that she was conducting security surveillance or possessed any capability beyond normal situational awareness. The suspicious individual appeared to be in his mid-30s, approximately 5 feet 10 inches with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of focused intensity that immediately triggered Rivera's threat recognition protocols. He wasn't carrying a shopping cart or basket, wasn't accompanied by family members, and his movement pattern through the store suggested someone conducting reconnaissance rather than shopping for groceries. Rivera continued processing her items through checkout while maintaining peripheral surveillance of the suspect. Her years of specialized training had taught her to recognize pre-attack indicators, behavioral patterns that suggested someone was preparing to commit violence against civilian targets. The man's body language, his route selection through the store, and his obvious disregard for normal shopping activities created a threat profile that demanded continued observation. The checkout line moved with typical commissary efficiency, while Rivera maintained casual conversation with other shoppers and processed her groceries with the same patient routine that characterized weekend errands. But her peripheral awareness remained fixed on the suspicious individual whose movement patterns were becoming increasingly concerning. Other shoppers in the commissary remained completely unaware of the developing threat situation. Military families continued their weekend grocery shopping. Children played between aisles while parents focused on meal planning and household necessities, and the general atmosphere remained relaxed and family-oriented. The commissary represented one of the safest environments on a military installation, a place where service members and their families could shop without concern for operational security or tactical considerations. But Rivera's trained observation had identified something that would transform the peaceful Saturday afternoon into a life-or-death emergency that would test everyone's ability to respond to sudden violence in an environment where no one expected to face combat-level threats. At 1,547 hours, the man in dark clothing stopped near the customer service counter, reached into his jacket, and produced a semi-automatic pistol that he raised toward the crowded checkout area where dozens of military families were completing their shopping. "Everyone get down," he shouted while aiming the weapon at children and families who had no warning and no time to react to the sudden threat. "This is for what you did to my brother overseas." Panic erupted throughout the commissary as shoppers realized they were facing an active shooter situation. Parents grabbed children and dove behind shopping carts. Military personnel who were unarmed during off-duty shopping scrambled for cover, and screams filled the air as families found themselves trapped in checkout lines with nowhere to run. The armed attacker had positioned himself strategically to control the main exit routes, and his weapon was trained on the most crowded area of the store, where maximum casualties would result from indiscriminate fire. Military personnel in the checkout area were unarmed civilians at that moment. Off-duty soldiers shopping with their families who had no immediate access to weapons or tactical equipment. "You killed my brother in Afghanistan," the gunman screamed while scanning targets among the terrified families. "Now you're going to pay for what you did to him." The terrorist's positioning revealed tactical planning that suggested he had conducted surveillance of the commissary and understood the layout well enough to maximize casualties while minimizing his own risk. His weapon was a Glock 19 with what appeared to be extended magazines, providing sufficient ammunition to cause devastating casualties among the trapped families. Captain Rivera was standing 12 feet from the armed attacker when he raised his weapon toward a military family with 2 small children who were trapped in the checkout lane with no escape route. The children were crying, the parents were trying to shield them with their bodies, and the gunman's finger was moving toward the trigger. Staff Sergeant Williams and his wife Sarah were crouched behind a shopping cart with their 6-year-old daughter Emma and 4-year-old son Michael, trying desperately to protect their children from the gunman who had them directly in his line of fire. Williams was a combat veteran with 3 deployments, but he was unarmed and helpless to protect his family from the immediate threat of execution-style murder. Master Sergeant Collins was pinned down near the magazine rack with his pregnant wife Jennifer, unable to reach the emergency exit due to the gunman's strategic positioning. Collins had served as an infantry squad leader and understood tactical situations, but civilian shopping had left him completely unprepared for combat response. Sergeant Martinez, the security guard, was positioned too far from his duty weapon to reach it before the gunman could open fire on the trapped families. His tactical radio was accessible, but base security response would take several minutes, far too long to prevent the mass murder that was about to unfold. It was at this moment, with an armed terrorist about to open fire on helpless military families, trained soldiers pinned down without weapons, and children about to die in a hail of gunfire, that something extraordinary happened. The calm civilian woman in faded jeans and worn sneakers moved with speed and precision that defied human reaction time. Captain Rivera covered the 12-foot distance to the gunman in what appeared to be a single fluid motion, her movement so fast that most witnesses couldn't process what they were seeing until it was already over. Her approach was silent, tactical, and executed with the kind of professional violence that comes from extensive training in close-quarters combat. Her movement pattern followed principles of tactical assault that most civilians had never seen outside of military training films. She approached from the gunman's peripheral vision, using his tunnel focus on potential targets to mask her advance, and closed distance with the kind of explosive speed that characterized special operations personnel trained for immediate action against armed threats. The armed attacker never saw her coming. One moment he was aiming at terrified families, and the next moment his weapon was flying through the air while he was crashing to the floor with his arm bent at an impossible angle and his consciousness fading rapidly. Rivera had disarmed him with a combination of joint manipulation and pressure point strikes that neutralized the threat without requiring a weapon of her own. Her technique was textbook perfect, efficient, controlled, and designed to stop the threat immediately while minimizing risk to bystanders. The disarmament sequence had involved a precise strike to the gunman's wrist that disrupted his grip on the weapon, followed by a joint lock that hyperextended his elbow while simultaneously applying a chokehold that cut off blood flow to his brain. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds and was executed with the kind of technical proficiency that comes from thousands of hours of specialized combat training. Threat neutralized, she announced calmly while securing the fallen weapon and checking the unconscious attacker for additional weapons. Someone call base security and medical assistance. Rivera immediately began conducting a tactical assessment of the unconscious terrorist to ensure he posed no additional threat. She checked for concealed weapons, confirmed that his breathing and pulse were stable, and positioned him in a recovery position that would prevent injury while maintaining security until law enforcement arrived. The commissary fell into stunned silence. Dozens of military personnel and families stood frozen, staring at the civilian woman who had just neutralized an armed terrorist with her bare hands while they had been helpless to respond to the threat. Master Sergeant Collins, who had been pinned down behind a checkout counter during the attack, approached Rivera with obvious amazement and growing respect. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but you just saved every life in this building. Where did you learn to do that?" Rivera was checking the attacker's vital signs while maintaining security awareness of the surrounding area. "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time, Sergeant." But Collins, who had 20 years of military experience including multiple combat deployments, recognized that what he had witnessed wasn't luck or civilian self-defense training. "Ma'am, that was professional-level tactical response. That kind of speed and precision comes from serious military or law enforcement training." Staff Sergeant Williams, who had been shopping with his family when the attack began, stepped forward with obvious curiosity about the woman who had saved his children's lives. "Ma'am, I've been in the Army for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone move that fast or neutralize a threat that efficiently. What's your background?" Rivera's response was carefully measured. "I have some experience with self-defense and emergency response situations." But Sergeant Martinez, who had been conducting commissary security and witnessed the entire incident, was willing to provide more context about what everyone had actually seen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Martinez announced to the assembled crowd, "what you just witnessed wasn't civilian self-defense. That was professional tactical intervention by someone with extensive combat training and operational experience." The revelation began to settle over the commissary crowd like incoming artillery. The civilian woman they had assumed was a military spouse had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded those of most active-duty military personnel. Staff Sergeant Johnson, who had observed Rivera's tactical movement patterns during her shopping, began connecting the subtle indicators he had noticed with the extraordinary combat response he had just witnessed. "Ma'am, now that I think about it, your situational awareness and movement patterns throughout the store suggested military training. You weren't just shopping, you were conducting security surveillance." "Ma'am," Master Sergeant Collins asked with growing respect, "would you be willing to share your actual background? Because what you just did suggests military or special operations experience." Rivera seemed to be weighing how much information to reveal, understanding that her response to the armed threat had already exposed more about her capabilities than she had intended to disclose. "I'm currently assigned to specialized training operations that require maintaining low-profile civilian appearance during off-duty activities," she replied carefully. But as base security and military police arrived to secure the scene and process the incident, additional context about Rivera's background began to emerge through official channels. Colonel Michael Reaper Thompson, the base provost marshal who responded to investigate the active shooter incident, recognized Rivera immediately when he arrived at the commissary. "Captain Rivera," Thompson said with obvious respect, "I should have known that an active shooter situation on this base would be resolved before security forces could respond. Your tactical intervention just prevented what could have been a mass casualty incident." The title and Thompson's recognition hit the commissary crowd like a thermobaric explosion. The civilian woman they had assumed was a military dependent was actually a captain with tactical capabilities that had just saved dozens of lives. "Colonel Thompson," Staff Sergeant Williams asked, "could you provide context about Captain Rivera's background and training?" Thompson's response revealed information that explained the extraordinary tactical response they had all witnessed. "Captain Rivera is assigned to our Special Operations Training Command, where her expertise in close-quarters combat and threat neutralization is used to develop tactical response capabilities for Special Forces personnel. Her civilian appearance during off-duty activities is an operational security measure." Master Sergeant Collins approached Rivera with obvious amazement and respect. "Captain, your response time and tactical precision were unlike anything I've encountered in 2 decades of military service. What specific training prepared you for that kind of threat response?" Rivera's answer provided insight into specialized military training that most service members never encounter. "My background involves close-quarters combat operations where immediate threat neutralization is required to prevent civilian casualties. The training emphasizes speed, precision, and minimal collateral damage." Sergeant Martinez, who had witnessed the entire incident unfold, was beginning to understand that Rivera's tactical intervention represented capabilities far beyond normal military training. "Captain Rivera," Martinez said, "your ability to assess the threat, close distance, and neutralize an armed attacker without using weapons was extraordinary. Where did you develop those hand-to-hand combat skills?" Rivera's response revealed the complexity of her specialized military background. Special operations require understanding that weapons aren't always available or appropriate for threat neutralization. Hand-to-hand combat skills must be developed to the level where they can stop armed threats immediately and effectively. Colonel Thompson provided additional context about Rivera's assignment and capabilities. "Captain Rivera's tactical expertise comes from operational experience in environments where traditional weapons weren't available and close-quarters combat was the only option for protecting civilian populations from armed threats." The base security team that responded to the incident conducted a thorough investigation of the terrorist attack, revealing that the gunman had been conducting surveillance of the commissary for several weeks and had planned the attack to maximize casualties among military families during peak shopping hours. "The intelligence we've developed," Thompson explained during his briefing to base leadership, "indicates that this attack was planned as retaliation for military operations overseas. The terrorist had identified the commissary as a target where he could cause maximum emotional impact by attacking military families in what they considered a safe environment. The investigation revealed that the gunman had lost a brother during combat operations in Afghanistan and had become radicalized through online extremist groups that encouraged domestic terrorism against military targets. His planning had been sophisticated, including reconnaissance of base security procedures and identification of periods when maximum numbers of families would be present in the commissary. Without Captain Rivera's intervention, Thompson noted in his official report, This attack would likely have resulted in multiple casualties among military dependents, and could have achieved the terrorists' objective of terrorizing military families and undermining their sense of security on base. Over the following days, Captain Rivera's heroic intervention became the subject of intense discussion throughout Fort Bragg as details of the incident spread through official and unofficial channels. Her ability to neutralize an armed terrorist while appearing to be an unarmed civilian had prevented what could have been a devastating attack on military families. What Captain Rivera demonstrated, Colonel Thompson explained in his incident report, is the kind of tactical capability that represents the highest levels of special operations training. Her ability to function effectively while maintaining civilian cover and respond instantaneously to active threats represents exceptional military proficiency. The incident led to enhanced security discussions about protecting military families during off-duty activities and recognition that threats could emerge anywhere, even in supposedly secure environments like base commissaries. The lesson from this incident, Thompson noted in briefings to base personnel, is that our protection often comes from people we don't recognize as protectors. The most effective security measures are often invisible until the moment they're needed. Master Sergeant Collins, whose family had been directly threatened during the attack, became an advocate for recognizing the specialized personnel who provided security through their mere presence on base. Captain Rivera's intervention saved my children's lives, Collins said during a base-wide safety briefing. Her training and capabilities were invisible to everyone until the split second when they meant the difference between life and death for dozens of families. Staff Sergeant Williams, whose family had been in the gunman's direct line of fire when Rivera intervened, developed a deeper appreciation for the hidden warriors who protected military communities. My wife and children would be dead right now if Captain Rivera hadn't been in that checkout line, Williams said during interviews about the incident. She looked like any other military spouse doing weekend shopping, but she was actually the most dangerous person in that building, dangerous to anyone who threatened innocent families. The tactical techniques that Captain Rivera had demonstrated during the commissary incident were eventually incorporated into base security training and emergency response protocols, providing military personnel with enhanced understanding of threat recognition and immediate response capabilities. Captain Rivera's response represents the gold standard for threat neutralization in civilian environments, explained Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who incorporated the incident into base security training programs. Her ability to assess, approach, and neutralize an armed threat without endangering bystanders is exactly what we train special operations personnel to achieve. But perhaps Rivera's greatest contribution was demonstrating that true security often comes from people whose capabilities remain hidden until the moment when those capabilities become the difference between tragedy and survival. The story of Captain Ghost Rivera became legendary at Fort Bragg, shared with new personnel as an example of how extraordinary protection often operates invisibly until the moment when it's needed most. Her example reminded military families that their safety often depended on people whose true capabilities remained carefully concealed behind civilian appearances. The most important lesson you can learn here, security instructors would tell base personnel, is that protection often comes from unexpected sources. The person standing next to you in the checkout line might be someone whose training and capabilities could save your life. The commissary incident also led to enhanced awareness among military families about the importance of situational awareness and threat recognition during routine activities. Rivera's ability to identify the developing threat before it materialized into violence demonstrated the value of maintaining tactical mindset even during off-duty activities. Captain Rivera's early threat detection was just as important as her tactical response, noted Captain Sarah Mitchell, who developed family safety briefings based on the incident. Her ability to recognize pre-attack indicators allowed her to position herself for immediate response when the threat became active. Years later, when Captain Rivera transitioned to other specialized assignments, her legacy lived on in the enhanced security awareness and emergency response capabilities she had demonstrated, and in the understanding that true protection often requires maintaining cover until the moment when action becomes necessary. Her story reminded everyone that in military communities, as in civilian life, the most effective guardians are often those who remain invisible until the split second when their extraordinary capabilities become the difference between life and death. Because the most exceptional protectors are often those who hide their warrior nature behind the most ordinary appearances. The moment when Rivera had moved to neutralize the armed threat had lasted less than 3 seconds, but its impact continued for years, reminding everyone that extraordinary protection often walks among us unnoticed, and that the people who seem most ordinary may be the ones with the most extraordinary capabilities to keep us safe. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever discovered that someone you assumed was a civilian actually possessed extraordinary military or tactical capabilities that they kept hidden? Have you encountered people whose ordinary appearance concealed remarkable protective abilities? Tell us in the comments about the moments when you realized you'd been near someone whose capabilities far exceeded your assumptions. And if you believe that true protectors often guard us invisibly until we need them most, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. No one mistakes her for just a civilian anymore, not after 3 seconds that saved dozens of lives.